Hi, and welcome to another edition of Carolina's Aviation Museum. Our program is brought to you by all the dedicated volunteers of the Carolinas Historic Aviation Commission. Now, these people work very hard without pay to maintain vintage aircraft in flying condition so that you can see them at air shows all around the country. And for those of you who don't want to travel, we also have a museum that sits the same place every week on the ground. That's our Carolinas Aviation Museum, which is located on Morris Field Road and Airport Drive right out by Charlotte Douglas Airport. Open every day except Friday, I believe. Also, the Carolinas Historic Aviation Commission has wonderful guest speakers the second Monday of every month at our monthly meetings. And we'll put a phone number on the screen later on so you can find out more about the Carolinas Aviation Museum and the Historic Aviation Commission that sponsors it. Our guest today is a very special flyer. His name is Bill Clute. He is from Greer, South Carolina, and Bill flies a Blanca Citabria, right, Bill?
Yeah, that's right, Dad.
Well, first of all, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Now, first thing I always have to ask any of our air show performers is, have you always wanted to fly?
I always wanted to fly. Always been around it. My dad's a pilot. I was always around airplanes. I grew up in a residential airport. Had a runway in the backyard. Everyone lived out there in a hangar and airplanes in the backyard. All the kids out there, we all soloed at 16 and went on to get our license. It's always been there.
So you just kind of grew up around aviation the way the rest of us grew up around a television set or something?
Yeah, pretty much. I grew up around a television set too. A lot of that, but the planes were always there. Vintage airplanes flying through the backyard.
What kind of planes would you see?
It ranged from everything. We had the aerobatic airplanes, Pitts Specials. Clint McHenry, a former national aerobatic champion, would come in an extra. We had a neighbor who was a member of the Confederate Air Force, and some of his friends would come over. They had P-51s. There was even an ME-109 Messerschmitt. Had an A-26 attack bomber. DC-3 came in through. We had quite a few.
That's quite an education, you know, up close and personal with those wonderful little warbirds. We're going to run some film here in just a minute. Let everybody get a little bit of a glimpse of the kind of thing that you do when you're in the sky flying that Citabria. And first thing I want to do is ask you about the aircraft itself, the Blanca Citabria. And a lot of our guests and viewers may not know, but Citabria is actually aerobatic spelled backwards. That's how they got the name for that aircraft. But tell me about that airplane. First of all, why do you fly that in air shows? Why a Citabria?
Well, first of all, it's 1976 Blanca Citabria. It's the same airplane I learned how to fly in, which kind of leads to why I'm still flying it today. Years ago, my dad bought the aircraft to teach my brother and I how to fly. We both did that. My brother's gone on to a career with Delta Airlines, and I still have the airplane. It's still the family airplane, but it's the one I have access to until I get another one, so that's why I'm still flying that one.
We're showing our viewers right now some of your flying in the Citabria, and I think we just had an in-cockpit view of you actually putting the aircraft into a spin. And right now, there you are rolling.
Yeah, it's coming out of a reverse half Cuban 8.
What kind of G-forces are you pulling right here?
Well, right there, it's probably about 0 because we're just flying inverted flight. But throughout the routine, I'll range from 3.5 to 4 to -1. The plane is stressed for 5 positive and 2 negative.
Well, this gives our viewers a real good opportunity to see the Citabria so they know what we're talking about throughout the program. It is a single-engine, high-wing aircraft. Looks very much like your ordinary Cessna almost. But what kind of power plant?
It's 150 horsepower Lycoming, AEIO 320. It's not a very uncommon engine for general aviation. The only difference is it's got an inverted fuel and oil system.
Did you say 150 horsepower?
Yeah, 150 horsepower.
Is that enough? I mean, you're up there, you're doing inside loops, you're putting it into spins. I mean, you must really have to fight the airplane.
It's lower powered than most of your aerobatic aircraft out there. It's capable of doing it, but it's not your ultimate aerobatic aircraft. You got to work hard to do it right.
Well, I think that's one of the things, actually, Phil, that would be to your credit, is the way that you have to work so hard as a pilot to do aerobatics with the Citabria as opposed to somebody in a Pitts Special or an Extra 300 where they have so much power at their command.
Yeah.
So are you physically working really hard in the cockpit? Are you horsing that airplane through maneuvers?
I'm working it pretty hard, but to me it doesn't seem like it's extremely hard because I haven't had a whole lot of time in the Pitts and in the Extra. I learned in the Citabria. It's what I'm used to. And it just seems like the way it should be. Yeah. I do have a little bit of time in the Pitts, and it is much easier, but I'm so used to the Citabria. I've got about 700 hours in the Citabria, and about 600 of that is aerobatics. I'm very accustomed to the way the airplane flies.
Well, for those of you who've had the opportunity to see Bill fly, he is very proficient flying that Citabria, and that's witnessed by the fact of the number of championships that you've won. I believe you are a two-time East Coast aerobatic champion, is that correct?
In the sportsman category, 1994-95, won the East Coast Aerobatic Championship.
East Coast Aerobatic Champion, 1994 and 1995. Tell us about competition flying, and we're going to talk about air shows later, but as opposed to air shows, first of all, describe for us the very first thing you do when you go to a competition and what it's like.
Okay. Firstly, you get to the contest, usually on the regional contest, you get there about a day ahead of time. You go through registration, there's a safety inspection. They come out and check over your airplane for any obvious flaws in it. You don't want to have anyone out there flying a dangerous airplane. Check all your paperwork, and you head on up for a practice flight, get as much practice as you can. The morning of the contest, you get out there early. It's about 7 a.m. for a briefing, go over weather, all the safety procedures, what we're going to do in case of an emergency, where we'll go, where the plane should fly, and we start flying the contest. The contest is based on usually 5 different categories. You've got basic, sportsman, intermediate, advanced, and unlimited, with basic being the lowest, unlimited being the highest. You usually try to get in 3 flights per category, depending on the category. Like sportsman, you have a known flight. Everyone flies the same routine. It's about 15 maneuvers. Everyone flies the same one. Usually try to get them in twice. If you move up to intermediate, you have a known. Everyone's still flying the same flight. You have a freestyle routine, which everyone makes up their own. It's a chance to show your own style. Mm-hmm. And then you get an unknown routine. They give that to you the night before you have to fly it. You don't get a chance to practice it. It's the first time you've seen it.
So you just go out there and fly it cold, no practice whatsoever. You run through it in your mind?
Yeah, you get the night to look at it, figure out what speeds, what altitude you want to start at, and then you just go out there and do it. And that's usually where you find the winner of the contest.
I was about to ask you, is that the most difficult part of the competition, flying cold like that?
Yeah, it usually is, because you don't know what they're going to throw at you. The routine is usually easier if you had a chance to practice it. It's not the most difficult as far as the maneuvers go, but they usually try to trick you. You've got to come out of the maneuvers heading in the right direction, and they throw a lot of little curves in there and try to mess you up, get you heading the wrong way.
And you're also working within what we would call an invisible box also. Would you describe that for us?
Yeah, the box is 3,300 feet by 3,300 feet. It's an imaginary box in the air. We have to stay within that airspace. Every time you fly outside of it, you get penalized. Different points depending on the category. There's a lower level to it. Most of the categories, well, I shouldn't say most categories, but the lower categories, that's 1,500 feet, goes down to 300 feet for the highest category.
Okay, now we're running your video right now. Would you tell us exactly what's taking place now when you're inside the cockpit? What are you doing and what's happening?
Right now we're turning around the top of a hammerhead turn. We had just pulled straight up just before the airplane stalled. We kicked in left rudder and right aileron, turned around, and leveled off. Right here, that's the top part of what we call an avalanche. It's a loop with the snap roll on top. You're doing a 3G pull-up. You get inverted, put in full rudder, either way you want, full stick, and
now this is where you went dead stick, isn't it? I saw the prop stop.
Yeah, right there. We just shut the engine off, and we'll perform a roll with the engine off. We're about 2,000 feet right there. Follow the roll with the spin, then a loop, half a roll and fly inverted for a few seconds, and then bring it right side up and bring it in for a landing.
And when we say dead stick, for those in our audience who might not be familiar with that term, of course that is a pilot's term, an aviation term, and it means that you're flying with your engine off, which a lot of people are thrilled at air shows, because a lot of people are, well, who don't know aviation well, are under the opinion that if you lose your motor, you're going to fall from the sky like a rock.
Right. That's one of the reasons I enjoy doing the great crowd response, because the general public, they do think you're going to crash if the engine quits, and they see this, and then they're feel a little bit safer about flying. Mm-hmm. They see that happens, and then you go out on an airliner, and it's got 3 engines, so big deal if you lose one.
And there's something that every pilot talks about anytime he goes dead stick, or he does what you've done here, flying maneuvers with the engine on and cutting the engine off. He talks about energy management. Could you explain that to our audience?
Well, it's a matter of knowing how much altitude you have and what you can do with it. Every maneuver I do there, I need a certain amount of speed for it, and usually to pick up the speed I have to lose altitude. But the whole time I have to keep in mind what I need left to get it in for a safe landing.
So you trade your altitude for airspeed.
Yeah.
And here we're showing you right now, coming in now, What are you thinking when you're coming in here with that prop off? Are you looking at the crowd, or?
About that point, I'm feeling pretty good because I've made it across the runway and the engine's off, and I know I'm going to make it in. I usually try to come in a little bit high, give myself a little bit extra altitude, because you can always lose altitude, but you can't get altitude back with the engine off.
Absolutely. What about crosswinds? How are you affected by that? Because you have no power left to actually fight against any kind of a difficult wind.
You fly it the same way, but if there is extreme crosswinds, I won't fly the routine just for safety's sake.
And dead stick is not something that's part of your competition?
No. In fact, if you lose the engine in competition, depending on the reason, you may get disqualified from the contest.
Oh, I was not aware of that. You've already said you kind of grew up around flying. You always wanted to fly. Any military experience, any military background with flying?
No military background at all.
Strictly a civilian pilot that's taken to the skies and always been around airplanes and loves to fly air shows. I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about your air shows. And, you know, we are very concerned always with safety at air shows. And what are your feelings about that?
Well, there is a fear, and I think the press has a lot to do with it, because whenever an air show ends up on the news, usually it's not good news. There's been an accident, and it gets magnified to be a big deal, which, I mean, it is a big deal. You got to take it very seriously. But the crowd shouldn't have a fear, especially here in the United States. It's been I think over 50 years since a spectator has been injured by a plane crashing in the United States. I know there's been some in other countries, but we have different rules here in the U.S.
You started flying at the age of 16. You soloed. When did you first start aerobatics, and who taught you to fly aerobatics?
Well, my dad taught me everything through my commercial license. I soloed when I was 16 and flew around a little bit. I really didn't get my license then. It was a matter of it was always there. One of those things where you don't appreciate it as much if it's always there. Then I went off to college and got to miss it, and that's when I got back into flying. And one of the things my dad said was if I was going to get my license, I had to go through spins. And it's not a required maneuver anymore. Years and years ago it was a required maneuver, but he wanted me to do it, make sure I could get out of it, if in fact I did get into it. And just enjoyed doing spins, so I wanted to learn more. He taught me the rolls and the loops, the basic stuff, and I took it from there.
And we're showing some of your trophies and awards now that you've won in competitions. Which of those is your favorite?
Surprisingly, the one on the left there, the second place intermediate, is probably my favorite, just because it's the intermediate category is a higher category, and I'm the only one I know that's flying a Citabria in intermediate, and to be competitive in it, it was very tough. I beat some very good pilots and with some very high-performance aircraft, and it was a lot of hard work to do.
So you're flying a Citabria against extra 300s and pits, and
in fact, I was able to beat an extra 300 in that contest. So it's a matter of experience, and one little messed up maneuver could put that Citabria out there in front of everyone.
Yeah, well, that's a lot to your credit, Phil, because I know that, you know, a single-engine high-wing aircraft is not the kind of airplane that you would normally see going up against a Pitts or an extra 300 and actually winning in competition.
Usually at the contest, the only time they come to look at my airplane is get the sunshade underneath the wing.
Those big wings.
Yeah.
Climb underneath. It's a pretty airplane, too, green and white wing aircraft. Let me remind you, in case you're channel surfing right now, we don't want you to go anywhere because you are in tune with the Carolinas Aviation Museum. Our program is brought to you every week by all of the dedicated volunteers of the Carolinas Historic Aviation Commission. There's the phone number on the television screen right now if you'd like more information about the organization. The Carolinas Historic Aviation Commission is a non-profit, all-volunteer organization. So everyone that's at the studio today, that works at the museum, that helps us out with everything that we do with air shows, strictly volunteers, and we can always use more volunteers. So if you're interested in anything to do with aviation in the Carolinas, we'd ask you to call that number and find out more about it. Right now we're talking with Mr. Bill Clute from Greer, South Carolina. Bill is an air show performer extraordinaire, and actually an East Coast National Aerobatic Champion. I've got to get that straight. East Coast Aerobatic Champion, flying a Citabria against aircraft like we've mentioned many times, the Pitts and the Extra 300, and really it's something to see. You horse around that big wing aircraft there. When was your first air show?
That was back in 1991, Rutherford County, North Carolina.
And what were your feelings? What went through your mind, your very first air show, as opposed to a competition?
That is different. At a competition, you don't have the crowd out there. The only people that are out there, usually the competition, are friends and family and volunteers who are actually working. Your other pilots will watch you for a little bit, but you don't have the general crowd just standing around watching you. And my fears were, are they going to be bored, or are they actually going to watch me? And it's different. You get up there in the airplane, and you can't hear the crowd. You can't, you're too far away to see if they're actually looking at you. So I'm pretty relaxed. I kind of put out of my mind, think, they're not even watching me, and I just fly the routine.
Really?
And later I find out from talking to them later that they were watching the whole time, really enjoyed it.
Well, again, I've seen your program many times, and I know that the dead stick especially is the one that really makes that audience just stand there motionless and speechless, you know, for the entire 5 or 6 minutes until you land safely. They're very, very much moved by that. What is the most difficult maneuver in your program?
Probably the most difficult is the dead stick, just to make sure I plan it out properly. Making sure I don't fly the last maneuver if I'm going to be too low. I don't want to stretch out my altitude to try to make the runway. I'm just planning that out. You've got to be real careful with that. I try to give myself extra altitude, but hot days, you never know what might happen. It doesn't glide as well on hot days.
Yeah, here we are again. We're going to run that video again in case you didn't get to see this earlier. This is Bill Clute from Greer, South Carolina, flying the Citabria. And have you already gone into your dead stick at this point?
No, we're still powered on right there. We're coming out of that hammerhead, straight down and pulling out.
A hammerhead for our non-aviation audience is when you go straight up into the sky, 90 degrees, turn again 180 degrees back down.
Right. We just came out of the avalanche. We're pulling out about a 3G pull right there. And here goes the engine shut off.
You can actually see the prop stop spinning there. So you're dead stick now. Okay, take us down with your dead stick now.
Okay, I've got the engine stopped. You usually have to slow it down to about 30 to actually get the prop to stop. I put it in a dive, pick up about 120 miles an hour and do the roll. It's at about 2,000 feet. After I complete the roll, I got to pull the nose up, slow it down, and I do a 1.5 turn spin. I believe I go to the left here on the video. And that's us heading down towards the ground, lining up and pulling out. It's about a 3G pull out, and I go right into a loop out of that, about 140 miles an hour into it. About 3.5 G pull across the top. And then we glide on out of that. I've got enough airspeed and altitude, and I do a half a roll, fly it inverted for as long as I can with the altitude, then I roll it back over and bring it in for a landing.
I know the audience is always amazed because the first half of your routine, you are doing powered flight, but you're doing basically the same maneuvers. I know you're doing an inside loop, probably a barrel roll. It's been a while since I've seen you, Bill, but the hammerheads, of course, the avalanche snap rolls on top of the loop. And then you go and do all that again without the engine.
The only difference is with the engine off, everything's going down. There's nothing that goes back up to gain altitude.
What about inside the cockpit? Are you just hearing the whistling of air going by? Is it kind of peaceful?
I don't know what you call peaceful. You hear a lot of wind, a lot of creaking. You're wondering what that noise is that you haven't heard before.
Really?
But it's not as quiet as you might think.
And what are you going, about 150 miles an hour?
No, the airplane's red line, 162. I usually don't get it above 140, 145 is what I usually go over. But gliding in, that's the last part when I turn for base leg for the landing, I'm 75 or 80 at the most.
Have you ever had any problems at an air show with a dead stick or any part of your performance? Have you ever had any tight anticipatory moments?
No, not really. I play it pretty safe. I'm more conservative than a lot of pilots. I keep a little extra altitude. It's worked out good for me. We had some strong winds out there at times that I thought might bother me, but they're usually coming straight down the runway, so it works out really good for me.
Well, we kind of glossed over earlier that you mentioned that you went to college, and I know you went to the University of North Carolina at Asheville, right? And you're very proud of the fact that he was on the basketball team at Asheville, so you've always kind of had your heads in the clouds one way or another.
Oh, yeah. It was a long bench, though.
The reason I bring that up, though, is because you, maybe being on a basketball team, did it in any way help you with the teamwork concept of an air show? Can you relate at all any kind of a metaphor between a basketball game and flying an airplane?
I don't know as much as the teamwork. I mean, there's a lot of things that have to work together in an air show to make it work, but myself as a performer, I'm out there solo, so that part doesn't come into play, but I think I'm much more relaxed from being through athletic experience. Being out there in the court, everyone's looking at you, and there's pressure on you. And I'm very relaxed in the airplane. I think a lot of it hasn't played the same part.
Again, we're talking with Bill Clute from Greer, South Carolina, and Bill flies that Citabria aircraft at air shows all over. And one thing I've always been impressed by, Bill, is the number of, you're like the Pied Piper of air shows. After you land, and these kids are all gaga because they've seen you land with your motor off, and of course the announcer does a lot with that. He plays it up a great deal. and it gets the crowd very excited, but the children always run over to your airplane, and I've seen you sit there for more than an hour sometimes signing autographs. Do you, is that fulfilling?
Oh, I love doing that. It's a big ego builder. I love to build my ego up, which we all know I need that. But I really enjoy all the comments the kids make, and they're always up there, and trying to get them to spell their name is the biggest feat there.
You're autographing their, when you're autographing your...
Yeah, I write it to, ask them what their name is, and I write it to them, but there's so many different ways to spell the same name.
Absolutely. Nowadays, especially, you know, I know some of the names that they've asked us to sign. There's a picture right now of your Satopria in-flight, and that is the same, I believe, the promo photograph that you give away at Airshows and sign for the kids. Have you had any of those young children who come back to you years later, they're now maybe 16 years old, and they say, hey, I saw you at an air show, I saw you fly, it made me want to fly. Has that ever happened to you, anything like that?
I haven't had that happen yet, but I've gotten some letters in the mail from parents and from some of the small children who sent it to me, and that meant a lot to me.
Yeah, that's got to be very rewarding. Well, you've already said that the dead stick is probably your most difficult maneuver. What do you feel is the most visually stunning maneuver that you have that's best for the air show crowd?
That would have to be the avalanche. It's my last powered-on maneuver, which is it's a loop with a snap roll on top, and it gets real slow, kind of tumbles, looks a little bit like it's out of control, and the crowd just really likes that one.
Now, you're not only going through a lot of G-forces there, but you're being thrown around quite a bit inside the cockpit, aren't you? I mean, are you really...
I get thrown around, but on top of the avalanche, you're going pretty slow when you go into the snap roll. So the G's aren't real big there. You get more G's coming out of the loop than you do anything. You get about 3.5 there, but the world's spinning around. Actually, I have to put my head to focus on one spot on the ground, let the world turn around, and when I see that spot, I know it's time to stop the rolling.
Well, that's a real good point, because I know so many people at an air show always wonder how you guys can... You're up there, you're flying upside down, you're flying sideways, you know, you're upside down, you're inside out, you're rolling, you're looping, you're spinning. They always know, how do you know where you are at all times? And it's, you know, your orientation, your concentration just has to be superb. How do you do that?
It's just a lot of practice, and you're focused on an object, and if you practice enough, you know where that object, where the plane's exactly where it's going to come out, and you're not worried about it.
So it's kind of like a dancer. You pick out a focal point, and do you use that throughout your entire routine, a certain focal point on the runway, or change?
I pretty much just know that after I roll a certain amount, it's a lot of timing too. Like if I roll for 2 seconds, I know the ground should be right here, I should be level. If it's not, I've done something wrong, and where am I? But through practice, it's not a big deal. You know where it's at.
So you're not, what you're saying though is you're not as concerned then with one particular focal point as you are, it's your own expertise and knowing that, you know, you've rolled this long, this amount of time, so obviously it's time to come out. And
it's timing and knowing where things on the ground should be. You can't always rely on timing, because if you messed up, then it's not going to be where you always expect it to be.
Who was the best pilot you ever saw?
Best pilot I ever saw. I haven't seen myself fly since it's on video, so there's been a lot of great ones. I've seen Patty Wagstaff, flown in contests with her. There's just a lot of great ones. Sean Tucker, Bob Hoover. I haven't seen Bob Hoover, or actually I haven't seen Sean Tucker in person, but I've seen the videos and know that they're two of the greatest that I ever lived. I saw Leo Slaughter fly in person. He's a 7-time national aerobatic champion, won the World Aerobatic Championship. Unfortunately, we lost him last year in a motorcycle accident, but I mean, he had to have been one of the greatest that ever lived.
Well, what do you feel makes a great air show? What would you do if you were promoting or putting on your own air show? How would you go about it? What do you think makes a great air show?
You need variety. You don't want to see the same act, similar acts. You want to see different type of acts out there. You want performers who are not only great pilots, but are great with the crowd, because you're up in the air for maybe 10 minutes. The rest of the time you're out there talking to the crowd, and it means a lot to the crowd to see the performer up close and talk to them, and you need that. It's a lot of showmanship.
And speaking of showmanship, I know at one particular air show, was it the Marine Corps Air Station down in New River, North Carolina, you did something kind of special. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, my fiance, no, at the time my girlfriend, was a little weak out there, but my girlfriend went to that show with me. It was her very first air show. And I had been thinking for a while about asking her to marry me. And flying down there, I was thinking about it. We had a practice, and I looked at where all the speakers were and where she would be standing. I kind of talked myself out of it during practice. I said, well, she probably won't even be able to, if I was going to ask her during the show, and I thought, well, if she's standing over here, she won't hear me. But the next day, I taxied out to do the show, and she goes, well, I'm going to walk over towards the crowd because I want to hear what they say about you, what the announcer says about you. So I still kept it out of my mind. I said, don't do it, Bill. You need to concentrate on your flying. Just go up there and do that. And I got up there and I was so relaxed. I said, I think I'm going to do it. So I called the announcer and said, hey, can you patch me into the PA system? I'd like to speak to the crowd for a minute. And he was an announcer. You know that you love it when the performers want to talk to the crowd. So I talked to him a little bit, thanked the crowd for coming out, and switched over to my girlfriend, asked her to marry me, and being real slick there, I said, I'll wait till I get on the ground to hear the answer. I didn't want to be thinking about that. And I asked between my powered on and my dead stick routines. I was still climbing up for the dead stick. I didn't shut the engine off and rolled on down for the landing. And the airshow promoters there were great about the whole thing. What I didn't know as I was doing the dead stick and gliding down, they went and they found her in the crowd, took her up to Airshow Center. They had me taxi, after I got my engine started up, taxi up to Airshow Center, shut it down. They gave her a microphone and had her give me the answer in front of 40,000 people.
Yeah, what was the answer?
The answer was yes.
Okay.
Thank God.
Embarrassing otherwise.
Very embarrassing. I was ready to
crank
crank
the microphone out there and says, no, I'm not going to marry you.
I figured I had something on her. I was a ride home. So.
Okay, so you had to do it. Well, we only have just a couple of minutes left, Bill, and you've really been a delight. But I would be lax if I did not ask you what advice you would give to any budding airshow performer. What would you tell somebody who wanted to be an airshow performer?
Take your time. Don't be in a rush to be the big-time performer. You don't have to fly at ground level to start off high. Be very patient. Take lessons from some reputable school who has good aircraft, and join a aerobatic club if there's one around you. I'm the secretary of Chapter 1 IAC, Chapter 109. That's International Aerobatic Club, Chapter 109 in Greenville, South Carolina. So if they want to contact me, they can join that club. We can hook them up with some instructors and get them started.
Okay, well, that's extremely good advice. Do you have a sponsor right now for your air shows?
Don't have a sponsor. I'm looking for a sponsor, anyone who's interested. I do get some help. I've got a web page that Clute Computers out of Nashville, Tennessee, which is run by my cousin. He runs that. So if you want to look at my web page, it's www.clutepc.com/Clute. You can contact me through there. But I am looking for a sponsor, a more full-time sponsor.
Well, Bill, you've certainly enlightened me a great deal about air shows and what it takes to fly in them and how to prepare for them and all that good kind of stuff. So I want to thank you. Bill Clute from Greer, South Carolina, has been our guest on Carolina's Aviation Museum. We want to thank all of our volunteers, especially the folks who give up their time and come out here to the studio to help make this program possible. All the members of the non-profit organization, the Carolinas Historic Aviation Commission, and we invite all of you to come out to our museum and see the OB-1 Mohawk, the DC-3, the Huey helicopter, all the great things that are on display at the museum right beside the airport. But for now, it's time to say down with the flaps, down with the gear, three-point landing, and we're out of here. Blue skies, everybody.